My name is Sarah Drummond. I want to give you just a little bit of context about where I've come from. I've never really worked for the public sector. I don't really know very much about government. I don't actually really know much about the crime and justice sector. I'm just a citizen that 2 years ago came up with an idea that kind of got me here accidentally. The idea I came up with 2 years ago was called My Police. And I entered it at 6 minutes to midnight before the deadline of a competition and said, wouldn't it be great if the public could actually go online and give feedback to the police and they would respond? Because I don't have time to send a letter. I don't really want to phone up because half the time they're quite rude to me and where I live anyway. So why don't I just use the mechanism, the computer that I spend 5 to 6 hours a day on, or if not more. And we've now launched it and we're working with Tayside Police to test it. And just how it works is that we collect a little bit of data from you, so we get a little bit of quantitative stuff. Where did it happen? Are you female, are you male, how old are you? We collect the story, we're rating it, so we're collecting a little bit more quantitative data, and then we post it up online. And the idea here is that down the bottom, the police can come and respond, so we send it exactly to the community officer, or I think it's in England, the PCSO, that has to deal with that story, the area that they cover, and they respond. And the whole point, and the reason I wanted this to happen, is because I wanted change to happen. And within about 6 weeks of a pilot, Tayside have changed something, and they've cracked down on parking because somebody complained about a certain area. So we're trying to get citizens involved to stand up and take action. And this is what we want to do, is strike a balance between qualitative and quantitative data. But we're here talking a lot about quantitative stuff today, so I'm really on the kind of coming from the angle where we should be supplementing this with qualitative stuff. And you'll all have probably seen this, yeah, the police.uk site, which crashed within its first hour, but probably showed that we are all very interested, the public are interested in knowing what's going on around them when it comes to crime. When you ask somebody, and you might disagree with me, but a lot of the time if you ask them what they want to know in their local community, they think immediately of a crime map, because that's the thing we're most used to. And they talk about it bringing accountability into the armchair for everyone who wants to monitor, their community. But I'm not so sure that it actually does, or this police.uk website actually helps us to do that. So in my workshop today, I'm going to be talking about where data is, and probably repeating many of the points that Will and Nick have been talking about, but it's actually really difficult to find crime and justice statistics. Or you can find them, but they're really hard to read. And just like Nikki said this morning, I'm not a statistician, and I've practiced to say that word today. I'm not a data expert. I'm not any of those. I'm a designer who pretty much colours in stuff and makes things happen. So for me, it's really hard to understand this. But I was actually at the Home Office yesterday, which was a real treat, and they talked a lot about trying to push APIs, which Nick beautifully explained earlier, so I'm not going to do it myself. But pushing these APIs that allow developers to use the data that's already out there, and I think this is where we should be focusing on. And the police.uk website have actually released an API for you to use, so you can get the details of who local officers are, where the neighbourhood policing teams are, what crime statistics there are. So I think we should really be heading towards using APIs and helping developers mash that up into stuff. And there's lots of ways it's being used, but as I said, I think we're really focused on this idea of mapping crime, because everybody seems to love a map. It's a really easy thing to visualise. And there's lots of different versions coming out. But one of the most fantastic ones, if you know it, is Oakland crime spotting, which has been developed in San Francisco. And you can actually look at over time and over a week, what day, what's happening in a city. So the data that's been released by the police is so up to date. It's so on the ball. It's just an absolutely fantastic one to take into consideration. But what's really interesting about that when you have live data is it can actually start to affect the way that people move around cities. And now that we have things like augmented reality, and most of us have smartphones, you can actually start to change the way that you move around the street, or the way that you interact with a city. Or you can check in and find which streets might be safer to walk home. So data has the ability to actually change the way that we move and interact with our world. But we're getting there, but we don't think we're actually quite there yet. And I think we really need to make it a bit more relevant to people. So taking these maps and actually putting them back into PDFs to go back out to the community, or even better, doing newspapers like this, like the data.gov.uk paper, where it goes back into the hands of people who will not interact with a spreadsheet, maybe not even a computer. So you're being involved in your community. I'll just flick through these. And I think if you've seen the police.uk site, there's been a lot of discussion around accuracy. This was a map that's been developed by a company called Placer. So they just took the data and the API and mashed it up and did their own thing. And they brought out some really key observations. Like if you take Regent's Park, for example, there is no crime in Regent's Park. It's completely safe. But the reason for that is that the police centre mark where crimes happen. So if they don't have a postcode or address, they'll look for 2 points I'll explain it later, but they don't put it where it's supposed to be. So another thing for the police and that we need to convince them about is actually creating really accurate data, because people really, really interact with it. And I actually met a friend the other day and I was telling her about the conference, and she chose where she was going to live in London based on the police.uk website. But if it's not accurate, is that really fair? So we've got a bit of things to think about there. Just like Nikki said this morning, I kind of think I'm not a data head. I don't really like numbers very much. So we need to make this much easier for citizens to interact with data and make decisions about things around them. And there are products coming out like Issue Map, where it's supposed to be quite easy to create a map, but I failed on the first and the second and the third time. So I think we need to think a bit more about getting citizens involved so that we are not fighting the government, but we are interacting with them using something that's powerful and not our fists. So I've got a lot of thoughts about, I can show you some examples if you don't really know what this is about. But I've got thoughts about how we can actually move forward and work with people like the Home Office and involve citizens in being part of open data and being part of data who necessarily don't understand what it really is. So I'll leave it at that.